Hello. This is Positive and Negative, a podcast about the intersectionality of mental health and the arts. My guest this week is comedian Gary Gulman. We have an excellent conversation about depression and what it means to be a man in certain times and places. Also, how depression can affect your creative process. Here he is, talking about how to push through.
I started talking about depression and my medicine worked, and so I had this area or topic that I could put some energy into trying to write some things, and it was very rewarding to get those things to work. And I will say I probably wrote a lot of stuff that didn't work, but the small chunks that worked were very rewarding, and the feedback was very good. So I was able to sort of find that vein and keep digging into it and try to bring other ideas and things and expand. And I remembered how I wrote the previous hour.
You can support us on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Tristan J. Miller to support us there. Also, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. Okay, let's just get to the interview, shall we? Number one, thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, and I appreciate you finding a time to do so.
No, thanks for coming up. We're in Harlem. Let's set the scene. We're in my living room where I do about half of my living, and we're in Harlem on the 12th floor. We have a nice view, and it's a nice sunny day, but it's very cold out.
Yes, it is.
Okay, and we're both wearing T-shirts and jeans, basically.
Very relaxed atmosphere.
We're in our socks because it's a shoes-off apartment.
Yes. You are a stand-up comedian. And
yes.
Where did you first start doing that?
I started on October 8th, 1993 in Boston, Massachusetts, in a comedy club called Nick's Comedy Stop, which was a place I had gone to when I was in high school, and I'd seen some really great comedians there. And I went on an open mic, and it went pretty well, and I was hooked. Yeah. And that's over 25 years ago.
Wow. Well, congrats on that.
Yeah, thank you.
As it says on the board. A visual joke, always good.
Always good with the radio. To clarify, I have a cue card from a TV set that I did where they wrote Gary Gulman, who just killed it, and I pointed out to them that they had written that before I even went on. So they
very
were
confident
just
in your
really optimistic. And
And before you started doing stand-up, you were a teacher, right?
Yeah, that was my last job as a civilian, was substitute teaching. Which that was December 24th, 1998 was my last day as a substitute teacher at my old high school. Yeah. And that was a great job. That's like the perfect day job for a stand-up.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that, you think?
Because you have to get up early, so you're not tempted to waste an entire day.
Yeah. And
you get to be around people. You're doing something good with your time, and you have your evenings free, and you can always, if you're really wiped out, you can take a nap after school and then go do your shows at night. And you're not making enough money where you're like, oh, the money's too good to leave this. It's actually ideal. But at my school you needed a college degree, but I mean, they never checked, so I'm sure just as long as you don't have a record or something. I don't know what the background check is like, but it was pretty easy.
Okay, noted. You and Lin-Manuel are the only people that I know that were like substitute teachers, and you also both live in Harlem. So are you secretly a Pulitzer Prize winning writer?
No, but I was on the short list for the Nobel Prize for Good Comedy last year. Yeah.
There's a Nobel Prize for that?
For good comedy.
Yeah.
It's called the Nobel Prize for good comedy.
Excellent comedy. Yes.
No, just good.
Just good comedy.
Yeah.
No excellent comedy. No world changing. Yeah. Yes, we want to let you know you're adequate, but in a global sense. You averaged adequate in a global sense. That's fun. Okay. So you are, it is 1993. You are still a substitute teacher. You were starting comedy.
I actually, when I started comedy, I worked for an accounting firm. Oh. I was an auditor. Not a tax auditor, just a financial statements auditor, where you would just check the guess all the paperwork involved in building financial statements, which is
That sounds
I can't
fun.
think of anything more boring. But I will say the people I worked with were really nice and funny. We had a really good time. But the job itself, the work itself, was mind-numbing. Yeah.
And that sounds like something that you'd need a degree in. Is that what you
Yeah.
had? Yeah.
Yeah, my degree is in accounting. Yeah, I was very practical up until I was about 23 years old. And then I kind of realized that the idea of security, financial or otherwise, was really a crapshoot anyhow. And I might as well be insecure in something that I love. So
Yeah.
that's also I wasn't very good at the auditing or the accounting, and it was really hard.
So that makes it easy.
And I couldn't rationalize or reconcile anything.
Yeah.
With life or ethics or anything. I mean, it was I guess it's an ethical profession. I just don't know that it's so helpful to the world in general.
Yeah, keeping things organized. And I mean, like, and that kind of
But I do love numbers.
You do?
Yeah.
Is that how you like approach joke writing? It's like it's a numbers game?
No, I do like playing with numbers within jokes and statistics and sort of, but there are funny numbers I find, and they're just funny figures, and I love the balance involved in numbers, and I have sort of OCD obsessions with certain numbers and counting, and so I'm very numbers oriented.
Yeah, I can definitely empathize with that. I work at a shop, and I was closing out the till, and every time the till is exactly where we need to start at the beginning of the day, it's such
gratifying.
Oh,
yes.
I had this thought on the way here. It's weird to think of 25 as an odd number.
Right. Oh yeah, I know. It's so true.
Because it feels round, but it ain't.
Yeah.
But yeah.
5 in general is a
it should be. It should be. Let's all agree that it should be
an even odd number.
Yeah.
But I remember Seinfeld saying that geometry was actually the class for comedians, like proofs. Proofs. Like he felt you were essentially trying to prove something that was false to be true within a joke, which is a huge generalization. I'm sure it doesn't hold up under scrutiny, but I thought that was interesting because I really enjoyed the results of proofs that they were very gratifying. Yeah, satisfying, gratifying.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And when we first met, we were doing a show, and you were doing a set about growing up in the 80s and certain expectations that were placed upon you. Because you did this really great, a very funny bit that I really enjoyed about Harrison Ford.
Yes.
And it's very good. And I would love to hear more about that in a less funny way, but in an informative way, about like what pressures you felt like growing up.
Well, there was a really narrow definition for masculinity and manhood, at least within my community and my circle. I grew up in New England, in Massachusetts, during the 70s and 80s, and was like an adolescent in the 80s. And I just remember there were just things that were considered soft or feminine, and they really were. It was pretty subjective that certain, like, for instance, the soda Sprite was considered a woman's beverage, and of course figure skating and gymnastics and things like that were considered feminine and soft, even though they're really strenuous and brutal and require great physical and mental strength. So there was just, soccer was actually considered soft.
Interesting.
Yeah, in the 70s and 80s, in my communities, soccer didn't get much respect, and football was sort of the king in my high school, and basketball less so, because it wasn't as aggressive, and baseball fell somewhere in the middle, and hockey was okay. Hockey was approved of.
Yeah. Did you play a lot of sports? You're a very large individual.
Yes. I'm very athletic. So I grew up in my first love was basketball, and then I got sort of teased into playing football my senior year, and I went out for football and wound up playing well enough to get a scholarship to Boston College to play football, and then my mind unraveled, and that was like my first experience with clinical depression.
Sure.
Cliny D.
Cliny D, yeah.
I forget who called it Cliny D. But
John Moe, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
He does another very good podcast, Hilarious World.
I'm a veteran of Hilarious World of Depression, yes.
So far, I have two that are veterans, you and Sam Grittner. And then
Sam's a great guy.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
What a man.
And you seem very sensitive and attuned to people, and balancing. I for my own personal curiosity, do you think you exaggerated or added to that because you are so, like, you're what, 6'3"?
6'6".
6'6".
Yeah.
You're a very large man,
Yeah.
and you have to, like, I would imagine you have to reassure people that you're not scary or mean a lot of the time. Is that correct or no?
Yeah. Well, I don't do that, and I never thought I had to, because I saw myself the way I feel, and so it's possible that I have thrown people off, but I also know, and maybe it's just my age and experience, I also know within seconds of meeting certain people, I'm safer on this person. They're gonna be they're gonna be nice and thoughtful and sensitive. So.
Sure.
I guess I assumed that everybody has that, but maybe they don't, and I've probably gotten better at disarming people over the years, hopefully, and making them feel comfortable and safe, and I hope so.
You absolutely, at least in my experience, you absolutely do. Yeah.
Yes.
You got a very gentle voice.
Yeah. Well, I was a big fan of yours the first time I saw you. I'm so impressed with your work. I think you're going to do great things.
Thank you.
As long as you believe and persist.
Yes.
Because there will be a number of times when you'll want to throw in the towel, because it's really hard.
It is.
And to compound it with any kind of difficulties mentally and emotionally, it makes it harder. But if you persist, you'll be great.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate that. And thank you for saying that. It's been a little difficult lately, but it's just, you just gotta keep going.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
New York is really competitive for comedians. Comedy has never been more competitive, and it's possible that New York and LA are the most competitive. And I hate that it is a competition, but there's just so much stage time. But and it's worth hanging in there, because it amazes me sometimes how much progress you can make in a really short time. And like, I thought this was going to take 4 or 5 years, and then within a weekend something clicks, or you get an opportunity or a breakthrough, and everything's different. Yeah.
That makes sense. Was it would you say it was less competitive when you were growing up?
Yes. Yeah. Comedy was less competitive. It was easier to get on stage, and it wasn't that easy. It was difficult, but it was so much easier than it is now. And I think I mean, in some ways I feel sorry for the people who have to start now, especially in New York, because I had an easier road of it. But on the other side of it, they're going to be better than the prior generation, because of the amount of effort and work it takes to really stand out when the field is so crowded. So it's sort of sometimes you question, well, how will this be great? Yeah. How will this be helpful? And that's how I see it. Yeah. Like, I think every generation probably faces the same thing, that it's a little bit harder than the prior generation to move ahead. Because when I first started doing comedy, it was after a comedy boom, so places were closing. So the guys who were older than me would say, "Oh, you really missed it." But I can say that to you, that you missed it. It was easier. It was easier to get on stage. There were more clubs, and you could make a living as a middle act a lot easier than guys do now. Yeah.
And you mentioned about, we were talking about, like, how you feel on the inside. And you also mentioned that was the first time you were 20. You said you were 23 when you had your first experience with clinical depression, or
no? I was first diagnosed with it at 18 or 19.
18.
The summer before my freshman year of college. I was at preseason training camp for football, and that was the first time I saw a therapist and got diagnosed and started going to therapy, and then later on got prescribed antidepressants. Yeah. And
what was that experience like, specifically being at like a football camp and then going from that to a therapist?
It was, I will say at first I didn't have any kind of idea as to what would transpire at the session. All I had was a few movies. I think One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was really the only mental health movie that I was familiar with, and I'm sure I came across some sort of therapy sessions on television from time to time, but they were always done either for laughs or there was a show called The Bob Newhart Show when I was growing up, and he was a therapist, so it was played for laughs, so that, and the people were very crazy. I feel like as a crazy person it's okay for me to use crazy, but I feel uncomfortable when people who aren't crazy.
I feel a similar way, and also like I feel like at a certain point you have to go, well, this is insane. Then what is happening? There's certain situations that are reserved for like, oh, this is too much.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I will say, when I got to therapy, even the first session, I was like, this is a revelation. This is such a relief to be able to unburden myself of all these thoughts and concerns and worries, and the relationship I had with that therapist lasted for, even after college, I would see him pretty regularly, and it was so helpful. It was life-saving and also life improving. It really made me a much better human being and healthier, and so that but I had experienced depression before that. I just didn't have a diagnosis.
Of course.
And just thought that was who I am. That was my personality. I was mostly sad and fearful, negative, and insecure. Yeah.
So when you're talking about being able to finally let all these thoughts and feelings out, what were some examples of how you used to feel?
I know that I had been I'd been devastated by a relationship in high school, and for about a week I had been able to talk to it about friends and family, and then after about a week it was like a combination of them not wanting to listen anymore, and also my own personal, I shouldn't be talking about this anymore, I should be over it by now. So I had sort of suppressed a lot of fears and feelings about relationships and concerns. It was really strange. By the time I got to college, I was just desperately lonely and so nervous around women and dating and things like that. I just was incredibly insecure and could not fathom having a normal relationship with a woman, because I was just so shy around them and so nervous and didn't know how to behave, and I look back on it, it seems ridiculous, but it was one of my number one concerns in life, that I was going to grow old and die alone.
Yeah, I think a lot of young men specifically worry about that. And how's it now? I mean, obviously, I'm much more comfortable with my ability to maintain a relationship and well, that's good.
Even but back then it was even like I could be friends with women, but anything past that would bring me great,
yeah, because you're
great anxiety.
I'm sure because specifically because you're all it's the scariest thing I think about life is that we're all just figuring it out and making it up as we go along,
Yes.
including relationships, and you don't want to
Yeah.
hurt people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
unless you're a kind of person that does, and I don't
Right.
think you are.
No.
I think you show that constantly.
I hope so.
Yeah, and so
But yeah,
that would be really nerve-wracking.
But it's crazy to me
Mm.
because I did have a lot of women friends
Mm-hmm.
and felt very comfortable in that regard. But actually being in a relationship was so anxiety provoking.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that like you'd felt this way when you were younger, and you just kind of assimilated it as part of your personality. And how was that? What was the process like? Unlearning those bad habits of like, this isn't my personalities, or this is an outside force acting upon it.
Oh, I mean, that's something that's taken a really long time
Mm-hmm.
to figure out and understand, and it's sort of a existentialist question as well, like who am I?
Mm-hmm.
Because for years on end I've been the depressed person and just like, for instance, I always bring food or flowers to people's houses when I'm invited for dinner now.
Mm-hmm.
And I always iron my shirts before my shows.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was depressed, and this was for years,
Mm-hmm.
I barely was on time getting to the people's homes for dinner, and was late most frequently.
Mm-hmm.
And so never had time to pick up anything or plan ahead. And I was sleeping a lot of times right up until my show time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't wear anything that wasn't either wrinkle proof or was something like a t-shirt that I could just put on and it would sort of de-wrinkle itself with body heat. So who is the real Gary Gulman? The guy who brings you the flowers if he's invited for dinner,
Mm-hmm.
or the guy who shows up 45 minutes late and is fairly silent during the entire meal? Because
Mm-hmm.
most people probably have a 50-50 experience with me over the past 10 years. I haven't been healthy more than 50% of the time. So does that answer the question? I'm trying to.
So it's an example of the answer.
Yeah.
Which was you're still working on it. I can think is the answer.
Yeah.
Which makes sense because I feel like specifically from what I understand of you growing up, it would be very beaten into you that like this is like part of you and not like I would imagine it would be very difficult to acknowledge it as an illness rather than just I'm sad as a person.
Right.
And that's hard. And I would also say, and this I guess is just my point of view in general, like who is the real Gary Gulman? Well, it's the best version of you. Yeah. I think everyone's themselves when they're at their best.
Right. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. That's a great point.
Because it's, because otherwise you're like, well, everybody is terrible because because everyone's, when they're not their best, they're hard. And so when they feel the best, that's, I think, when people are themselves. But that was a little bit like, we were talking about like your first experience with depression. What is it like for you now? How do you navigate it?
Well, over the past year, like since October of 2017, I've been feeling very well. Good. And been productive and creative and looking forward to things and enjoying my life. I will say there was I had 2 Cavalier King Charles Spaniels, and there are various pictures and other evidence of them throughout the home. But one of them passed away in August, and we were really close. And for a week I was pretty good and was really sad and mourning, but not blaming myself and not feeling really terrible. And normally over the years I would just sink into it and say, well, this is the new level, and it's not as bad as it was a year before, so I'll go with this. And I was really proud of myself, because I went to my psychiatrist and I said, this is going on, and these are sort of depressed thoughts, not just sad and mourning thoughts. These are depressed, blaming myself, feeling guilty, and not being able to get out of bed with the same mood that I usually do. And he said, let's increase the Cymbalta and by 20 milligrams from 60 to 80. And within a week I was like, okay, this is better. I didn't forget about my dog, but I stopped blaming myself and feeling guilty, and I was able to get out of bed easier, and I felt better. And I thought, I think growing up, I thought everybody feels lousy about themselves because they haven't done a great thing. And once I do something great, then I'll feel really good about myself. And I think a large percentage of Americans feel that way, and maybe humans. But then 2 summers ago, I read Bruce Springsteen's autobiography, and he talks about how he couldn't get out of bed, and he was in his 50s. And up until that time, I thought, I really believed that if I had worked as hard and achieved as much as Bruce Springsteen, that I would be happy just based on those circumstances. And when I found out that he wasn't, it finally, after my entire life, it dawned on me that there was no level of achievement and hard work that was going to make me feel good about myself. Because I'd even heard other successful people say they were depressed, and said, well, maybe because their career isn't where they want it to be, or maybe their relationships are bad, they've been divorced, so I get it. But when Bruce said that he couldn't get out of bed, it finally clicked with me that this is I mean, I from outside of it, I can say it's an illness, but from within it, while I'm going through it, I only see it as a character flaw and sadness. But hopefully the next time, and hopefully there won't be a next time, but if there is a next time, I'll be able to recognize. It's hard to convince people who are within it that it's not their fault. It's really, really hard, because the depression is so insidious that it tells you. It's one of the symptoms of depression to tell you that it's your fault. Yeah.
And just from like a practical standpoint, I'm also very curious, because you're on the road a lot as a comedian, and say a prescription runs out, or you need to talk to your therapist. How do you manage that from a day-to-day, like when you're away and stuff?
Well, I'm vigilant about my prescriptions, and I keep them in my carry-on, so that they don't get lost in the luggage. And I have had a good relationship with the pharmacists that have provided over the years. And so I haven't had a situation where I'm on the road and I need a prescription filled, and I wasn't able to. I've had to have it filled, but the pharmacists have come together and collaborated and made me well. The other thing with travel is that I used to just sleep from the moment I got into the hotel as frequently and as often as I could, and I used to think I was just tired and sleepy, and in some cases that's the case if you're getting a really early flight, but for the most part I was just depressed and putting off life. And the best thing that I've been able to do while traveling is to exercise. And it used to be for a 3-day stay in a town, I would say just exercise one time while you're there. And usually it's 3 out of 3 days or 2 out of 3 days since I've been feeling better. And exercise, I've never found, can take me out of the deep depression, but it can tip the scales into a healthier outlook during a day that you're on the fence about whether it's going to be a good day or not. It's I don't know how other people's depressions manifest, but I have what they call a diurnal variation, where I feel much better as the day progresses than I did in the morning. Mornings are really, really tough. Yeah,
I can sympathize with that.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. There's just some days you wake up and you're like, this again. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've watched like your special and a few of your videos and that sort of thing. And what it feels like, you talk a lot about, like there's that bit about you being, I think, in Trader Joe's and a woman in a cart.
Yeah.
And you being like judgmental of this person, and there are rules to society.
Yes.
And that sort of thing. And do you think that comes from like an anxious place, or do you think that's just do you think that's personality?
Yeah, I think that's personality is this, and a lot of comedians have it. They have this desire for justice and to right wrongs and to get revenge on circumstances and on people and I used to think that comedians were, or at least my version of comedy was, that I would not have a snappy comeback to somebody carrying out an injustice against me or hurting me or insulting me, but if you gave me enough time and a pad of paper and a pen, I would craft a perfect response. And I think initially a lot of comedy is just snappy answers to stupid questions, and then and then you move on and you actually write things that are not based on coming up with a quick comeback, but I think that might be where some of my motivation for writing jokes is to overcome these injustices and these insults over the years.
Sure.
Day to day.
Yeah. Do you get anxious about shows?
Yeah. Before every show, almost without exception, I'm anxious. There's usually a time during the day where I'll say, if I were to be introduced right now, I would have the best show of my life. And 0 times in my 25 career have those moments intersected.
Yeah.
I get so anxious. And I saw Patton Oswalt in an interview last summer where he said that, and it might have been the summer before. The summers. He said that he still gets sick to his stomach before a show.
Wow.
And he's incredible. So
yeah,
I don't get sick to my stomach every time, but before a TV appearance or a special, or sometimes you'll have certain people in the audience who you need to or want to impress. And so when I did the Montreal Comedy Festival this past summer, and it was my 3rd or 4th time, before the first show, I was very anxious about doing it, because I didn't know whether anybody would show up, and I didn't know whether the jokes would translate to another country, and whether they would have similar references. So I did all kinds of research into what part of my act would cross over and things like that. So I was prepared, and a lot of times I can put my anxiety into preparation, and that's really, really helpful. It takes your mind off it and also makes you a better comic. But there's that time when you've done all the preparing you can do, and the show is still a half hour away, where you're just like pacing and worrying that the audience is not good, or or this person who's going on before you is doing so well that they're not going to like you, and I find that most of the time it's unfounded, and I rarely, even when I bomb, for me it would be fine. For the person I was when I first started, it would be like, oh, that was a pretty good set, but now the bar you set for yourself is higher.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I have two thoughts and then a follow-up. My first thought is, like, my goal always is to be as comfortable on stage as I am at my home rehearsing the jokes.
Yes.
Because then, because at least the way I do it, like, I run the thing and I start ad-libbing and I'm like, oh, that's funny. And I'm like, where is this when I go
where's
on
that
stage?
guy? Yeah.
Yeah. Who is he? The other thing is, like, I'm never afraid that the show's not going to go well, because I can always get over, like, my ego getting hurt, but I'm always worried that no one's going to show up, and I think that's a difference between where we are in our careers.
Yeah, but like, I still have that because, for instance, let me think, where was it? Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut.
Okay.
I didn't check to see how many tickets we had sold, and the last ticket count I had was like 600 a few months ago for a 1,400 or 1,500 seater. Yeah. And so I'm looking from behind the curtains, and people are coming in, and at first I'm thinking, I'm going to be performing to half a house, and then by the grace of God it was full, but I was I was really anxious the whole day about whether people would show up, and you try to tell yourself it doesn't matter, you've done your best, it's just the casino, but at the same time you walk out there and it's half full and you think, I've got a long way to go, and I do, but it's almost never helpful while you're climbing a mountain to look up at the top of the mountain. And I think that's such a great metaphor for comedy.
Yeah.
Look at your act and where you want it to go. Don't look where the Kevin Harts are performing. Yeah. If Kevin Hart only sells 1,500 tickets to a show, it's a real problem.
And how do you talked about, like, doing a lot of research and preparing. Is that the only way you soothe your anxiety before a show?
I do some prayers. I have certain prayers that I say, and some breathing, and there's some music I sometimes listen to, and sometimes talking to the other comedians is helpful, but a lot of times it's just pacing back and forth and deciding on what I'm going to open with, and luckily, almost without exception, at least on the live shows where there's not a camera, it goes away right away. But whenever I do TV, there's always a moment during the set where I think, oh, this is on TV right now. I hope you're not doing certain physical nervous tics over and over again during this set that is going to distract people and make you look nervous, because it's hard not to be nervous when you're doing a TV set. It's just and there are plenty of people who don't get nervous, but I'm not one of them. Being on TV makes me anxious.
I mean, I think that's a reasonable reaction to a certain extent. It's like there's a fair amount of, not to make you nervous, but there's a fair amount of stakes there.
Yeah.
But
in reality, there aren't any stakes.
Yeah.
At this point in show business, you're not going to make or break a career with a single television appearance.
Yeah, it's not like Carson.
Right.
Yeah.
And even Carson wasn't like Carson.
Yeah.
It's exaggerated how influential it was. I think, yes, some of the guys would be famous the next day, but you could probably count on one hand how many cases that was. I remember this guy, after I did my first Tonight Show with Jay Leno, he told me, when I did it, you were famous the next day. And I didn't say it to him, but I thought it to myself. I have no idea who you are. So if you got famous from doing Carson...
Yeah, because even, like, Steve Martin in his book was like, I did the Tonight Show 5 times.
Yes.
And then it hit.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve Martin.
Thank gosh.
Yeah.
And talking a little bit about, like, being on TV and that sort of thing, we've spoken previously, and you had mentioned leading up to and after your special that is on Netflix, and I would say I watched it after last time we spoke. It's very good.
Oh, thanks.
It's objectively very funny.
Thank you.
But you had some concerns, and you fell into an episode afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
And I would love to hear about that.
Yeah. so I shot it, and I'm not sure why this was the case, but I can say objectively that the audience wasn't as energetic for the shows. I did 2 of them. They weren't as energetic for the shows as the audiences had been throughout the tour I had done. It was called It's About Time Tour, and then the special is called It's About Time. And I just remember thinking, oh, I really needed the audience to be really warm and hot, and warm in accepting me, and hot and really reacting to the jokes, because that always gives me confidence, and I need it for timing.
Yeah.
And I need it for my ego to feel good about myself during the show.
Sure.
And I put out better energy when the audience is delighting in it. So I can say objectively that the audience wasn't as good. Not that they were terrible. I didn't bomb, but they weren't as good as all the audiences I had performed in front of during the tour. And then afterwards, and I'd worked so hard, and I'd worked for years, and it was hard to even get. It took some time, several months, to find a production company that wanted to pay for it and produce it, and so it was just hard, and then that night I can remember just being like, wow, that was a letdown, and that was 3 or 4 years of writing and road work and performing, and
wow.
it was disappointing, and I wanted it to have gone better, and I started to feel really, really sad, and my one of my feelings was this was the best I could do. I was never going to write better jokes than I had written, and it wasn't good enough. And then it took a while to sell it to Netflix. It took more than 6 months, I think, to sell it to. We went to different places, but ultimately I wanted it to be on Netflix. I had a lot of success by having my previous specials on Netflix, and so that was troubling, and sometimes you just need one event to really get the wheels in motion for a nice dive into the abyss of deep major depressive disorder. So it couldn't have been that, because my career had been in worse places, and I'd been in worse places financially, relationship-wise, emotionally, everything. It was just, I could probably count a dozen different things that contributed to that, but that was sort of the inciting incident that sent me on that. And it's really, really sad. I wish I had been better equipped to deal with it. Like, I'm making a new special again, this probably at the beginning of 2019 or the first few months, and I'm still anxious. Like, what if it doesn't go well? But at the same time, I'm certain that if I do go into a deep depression, it won't be because the special didn't go well. It'll be
well, that's growth.
Something else, which I think is growth.
Yeah.
That I'm prepared, and it seemed perfectly reasonable to put all that weight on the special at the time. But now in retrospect, I realized that it wasn't worth it at all, and I wish I had better perspective and understood better. It was the first setback in a long time. I had a nice run, and I wasn't prepared. Yeah, and I think I'll be more prepared. I think with depression, I'm always reticent to say I had it or I went through it. I'm always more along the lines of somebody who's a survivor of another illness, where they say they're in remission, or they're Alcoholics Anonymous. They say I'm recovering.
Yeah. It's like a recently broken up with relationship, because they could text you at any moment.
Yes.
and you don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. But it sounds like you really took it to heart, that experience, and you're like assimilated in your process moving forward, which is really great that you were able to turn what is objectively like a negative thing into like growth and positivity. But how long did that last, and how did you, because it lasted a while, you being bummed out about that.
Yeah.
And how did it impact your like creative process and going back up on stage after you'd done like an hour or something you'd worked on for a very long time? Not to make you upset again. But like something that you worked very hard on for more than 1 year, and then how did you come back from that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably put in 2.5 or 3 years into the writing of what became that show, which probably was like 65 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wrote over the next, so I shot that in 2015, and until 2017, I put together maybe 7 minutes of the 100 minutes I tour with today. So everything, 93 minutes of what I will do tomorrow night, say in Milwaukee, has been written since July of 2017. The 2 years are longer than that. After the special, I couldn't think of anything.
Yeah.
My brain was not working, and that was that was another thing. Had I somehow been able to come up with some jokes and new stuff, I would have been so energized by that the depression wouldn't have lasted as long. Part of the problem with depression was I wasn't able to write new jokes, and without new jokes at the level I am in comedy, I'll get another tour out of the old jokes, and then the audience will half the audience will say, well, we saw the same thing last time. I don't know that I want to go back.
Yeah.
And I can promise you they're not going to come back a third or fourth time if you're doing the same stuff, not these days. And so that became that compounded the depression. When I think back, it's like, yeah, it was a setback with the special, but the real problem was that I thought I was finished creatively, and that was frightening and nearly undid me.
Yeah. And how did you work through that?
I don't know. Luckily, I started talking about depression, and my medicine worked, and so I had at least this area or topic that I could put some energy into trying to write some things, and it was very rewarding to get those things to work. And I will say I probably wrote a lot of stuff that didn't work, but the small chunks that worked were very rewarding, and the feedback was very good. So I was able to sort of find that vein and keep digging into it and try to bring other ideas and things and expand. And I remembered how I wrote the previous hour and started to apply my sort of formula and approach to the new stuff that I was creating. And again, I noticed that when I'm first writing a joke, it's maybe not even the premise. The premise in the topic will survive, but a lot of times the premise and the angle will not survive to the final product. And so I remember that in all the jokes that have been memorable over the years. Very rarely do they resemble what they started off with the first night you did it. It's mostly I think a matter of your interest and your attention on something, and maybe that works with some sort of subconscious where your mind is working on it when you're not thinking about it. But if you have an interest in writing jokes about depression, just write them. Or an interest in anything, just write jokes about that, and eventually on stage one night you will get a sentence that is worth keeping.
Yeah.
And you may work on it to silence for a long time, but if you keep your attention on it and you are diligent, you'll get that sentence, and that's funny. And when that sentence works, then there's some running room for this is a football metaphor, to gain some yardage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That reminded me of something Carrie Fisher said, which is, a joke is hope, isn't it?
Oh, wow.
And that when I first heard that, I was like, oh, that's the whole worldview that I have.
Oh my gosh. Did she say that in Wishful Drinking, or did she say it elsewhere?
In The Best Awful.
The Best Awful.
Which is one of her novels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the other thing, and I think you kind of answered that, but the new hour, are you talking about mental health stuff?
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah, extensively. Yeah.
How have audiences reacted to that? Because I know sometimes I start my set and I hear all the oxygen and go, oh, we wanted to drink and have fun.
Yeah. I mean, I have an advantage in sure. that most of the time the people are there to see me.
Yes.
So I've heard Jerry Seinfeld said that if they know you, the audience will give you 5 minutes. Yeah. That's not true. It's most of the time the people are there to see me. Mm-hmm. And so they're used to me doing very light show.
Yeah.
And when I didn't always do this, I would just do however long it took to be doing really well, and then I would ease into stuff about my biographical stories about my depression and treatment and things like that. And I eased into it over several months. Mm-hmm. And then I found sort of a narrative to tell this story. Mm-hmm. And so I get the idea of you only getting 5 minutes when you're famous is complete horseshit. You've attracted people who love your sense of humor. Yeah. I mean, you get so much leeway. You still have to write good jokes. Yeah. But anyhow, we could talk about this for hours. The point is that I think what's true is maybe I get a couple of minutes at the beginning where I can set up what's going on, and not even a couple minutes, 35 seconds to set up what went on. And but my instinct is always to try to even make the setup funny. Yeah. You've got all this time and all these sentences, so I try to make the setup to the preamble to the show pretty funny, so that the people will not be bummed out but there are sometimes, because sometimes I have to do it in comedy clubs when I was first working on it, especially I needed the repetitions. So I was doing it in comedy clubs, and there were a couple of times where I could tell the audience was not very amenable to me being so vulnerable. And I remember one show in particular in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The manager, I don't know why he did this, but he showed me a comment card, and the person had written in all caps with countless exclamation points after it, "Don't talk about depression." And it was like, if you ever wanted me to double down, that's how you do it. Yeah, had it been a number of comment cards, I would have maybe taken it to heart. But the other thing is that people will say it's just very brave to talk about depression. For me, it hasn't required any bravery, because the feedback I get afterwards is so heartening and so encouraging. So that's been pretty easy. But if I'm doing the Comedy Cellar, and maybe a quarter of the audience is familiar with my work, I'm not doing depression jokes right off the bat to open with, and I'm not doing the darkest stuff at a comedy club on a Saturday night, on
Sure.
a Sunday, on a Monday. So you have to pick your spots, and the worst thing you can do as a comedian is not protect your ideas and your jokes and your. Some guys don't mind doing a joke to silence, but a lot of times even a joke that works over and over again, if I get silence one night, I start to second guess it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'd never done the joke before, I even comment on this sometimes on stage. I'm say, imagine if that was the first time I ever did that joke that has proven to be very popular and in some cases has millions of views.
Mm-hmm.
And the audience is just like, yeah, we're not interested in that. And
Brutal.
if my ego were any more fragile, I would have just not done it ever again after it failed the first time. But you kind of, when a lot of young comedians ask, and I used to ask this, how many times do you give a joke until you drop it? And it's like, if it's a joke that's meaningful and original and important in some cases, like it's important that we talk about our mental illness. It's really important. It's really helpful. Then I wouldn't say go out and try it with the same exact words, delivery, sentence structure, and grammar, but keep slogging away at that topic, and because eventually you'll crack it. You'll well, I can't promise that. I mean, some people there's just no hope for, but with you have enough talent naturally and through your hard work that you'll be able to crack it. And the other side of not performing in front of your own audience is you get really good at comedy. Yeah. So it's unfortunate that everyone can't find their niche audience right away, but it also builds your skills and hones your craft. And when you do get your own audience, it's incredibly rewarding, and you will improve and expand your work exponentially. Yeah.
And what you just touched on kind of covers this, but what's like the biggest advice that you have for people who are creative people who are facing depression and how to push through it?
Oh my gosh. My brother used to tell me all the time, don't give up. And it's impossible to hear that. Yeah. You can listen, but I didn't hear it. And so I feel like I can't tell people that. I can only tell people that Wellbutrin is more effective than being Bruce Springsteen. He took antidepressants and he felt better. I don't see them as a crutch. I see them as the same way I would say take vitamin C if you have scurvy. Is that the one that? That is. If you're depressed, take antidepressants, and if you have scurvy, take vitamin C and see a therapist. But honestly, when I was at my worst, a therapist was kind of like trying to rewire a building while it was on fire. It was hard, and I don't know that it was helpful. I mean, it got me out of the house, but I just remember being in such pain on that couch. I can't believe I recovered. So the other thing is that there's hope. Don't give up hope, because I felt I was hopeless. But I'm reading or rereading Mark Vonnegut, who's the son of the late Kurt Vonnegut. He's a pediatrician, but he wrote a book called the Eden Express about it's a memoir of his battle with schizophrenia. And his father, after he was out of the woods and had 2 adult children of his own, said to him something to the effect of, it's remarkable that you're doing so well. And he said, well, I had a mild case. And that's how I feel. There are people who have had it worse. As bad as I had it, and I was hospitalized on 2 occasions, there are people who have had it even worse. So I completely understand if you're not feeling up to it today, but maybe tomorrow. Yeah.
That's
fighting, that is.
Yeah. I think that's a very, very good sentiment on which to end. And so,
excellent. This was so great.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure.
And having me over, offering me soda or water.
Coca-Cola or water, that's what we have. Or almond milk.
Just a big glass of
still
almond.
Stands.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, man.
But you can try.